I'm in Guid company this week. My guest is fellow Ayrshire Dr. Jimmy Begg. We'll ken Doon Loner for his knowledge of the poetry of Burns, for grubbing poachers in the act, and for looking after patients in a wheen of languages, including his own mother tongue, Scots. Welcome, Jimmy. You work as a GP in Ayr. It strikes me that the Scots is still a language that's full of expressions relating to, certainly to the human body. We still refer to our lugs and we're in and we're horn and we're fit, etc. Do you find that you still naturally use Scots in your profession?
Well, it depends who I'm talking to. If I'm talking to an English buddy for Alloway, I'd use my Queen's English and my medical terms. If I'm talking to a buddy that has a Scots tongue in their head, I'll use Scots expressions. But most of the Scots expressions that we tend to use or mind of are, I would say, to deal with basic bodily functions rather than highly technical medical knowledge. Wee examples, for example, are the boke and the dry boke. When you've boked long enough, you've got the dry boke, and then that can go into the bile, which is when you're bringing up bile. And one of the things that the old folk used to be a bit feared about if they've got the black bile, which we would call a hematemesis, bringing up blood, and that was a serious condition. And if you heard somebody, I mind the old days, my grandfather had a dose of the black bile, and that worried them at that time because it meant he had an ulcer and he was bringing up blood. But it amuses me, in fact, when I hear some of the folk coming in who speak Scots, who say, "We Johnny's off a seat with the boil, doctor." You know, they're trying to be polite, they're half polite, and they're wrong all the way through because it really has the bile, it's not the boil, which is a fluke.
And what are some of the expressions that some of your patients have come away with?
I don't know. I find that most of the folk that come away with expressions are the old folk. I have a great rapport with them, and you can get an awful lot out of them, and they enjoy your company if they speak Scots and you speak Scots back to them. There are wee expressions. I mean, a wee example, you know, you get into a house and somebody's dodding away through the room, and one old buddy said, "Oh, doctor, I'm as slow as shuckwater the day," which is a marvellous expression. Another old buddy, a bit bedraggled looking, you know, I looked in the mirror, doctor, this morning, I'm looking like a chowed moose. They're really quite funny. And another thing that comes up, certainly, it's an expression. My father's got a great expression. "I'll see you next week if I'm spared." It's this sort of, he kens damn fine.
Fatalism.
It's fatalism, but it's no fatalism because he's hoping he will be spared. But they like to put this into a wee bit sympathy. And I've been to a house more than once when the old buddies were lying in their bed, feeling sorry for themselves. And the expression was, "Do yin beer clean shirt, and that'll be me, doctor." And I can find they don't mean it. They're the yins that
the last
of the 90. So there are various expressions, and I think the classic was an old buddy I went to see. She was lying in her bed and she hadn't been wheeling or spearing away trying to find out what was wrong with her. And I was asking her about her kist, if she had a host, or I was asking her if she had gripping pains in her stomach, and I was asking her about all the symptoms, trying to get out to her. And I eventually came to her appetite, and I said, "And who's your appetite, Mrs. Brown?" "Oh, nothing wrong with my appetite, doctor," she said. "My mother used to say there's things would lie in your Meg's stomach that wouldn't lie in the burricate."
There was an expression my father used for an ointment or a salve. It was a saw.
A saw, aye. That has occurred to me, and I often wonder what some of the younger doctors would make of this old buddy I went out to. And she had an awful bad ulcer in her leg, and the first thing she asked me, "Doctor, can you give me a good saw for my bad leg?" I think she'd be heading for an amputation with some of the keen youngins nowadays.
I think a few young doctors would get a gunk with a question like that.
Oh, they wouldn't have a clue what they're talking about.
But you also, apart from your work as a GP, you've worked for a few years on the helicopters, going out in the search and rescue missions. What's that like?
Well, for the last 5 years I've done search and rescue work at HMS Gannet with the Sea King helicopters. For the last 3 years I've been the medical officer out there looking after the crew, the base complement, the RAF and Navy complement, about 600 souls. I find that's the cream in the cake as far as my personal fun's concerned, because I enjoy the helicopter work. A lot of folk don't like fleeing at all, but I must admit I enjoy it fine. It has its moments, sad, humorous and fearful.
The likes of, are you ever cried out in Richt coarse weather?
Most of the times it can be coarse. A lot of our work is what's called medivacs for the islands, and most of that work's done by the air ambulance for Glasgow. But if there's a mist doon, or if it's blowing a force 8 gale, or if the wee aircraft, fixed-wing aircraft, can't land at all, they send for our Sea Kings, and they've got what they call an all-weather capability, good radar, and they can get out in weather that the other planes can't manage. So aye, we can boot. It's mainly bad weather. I've yet to see the Western Isles on a sunny day.
And are you ever involved in any dangerous situations where somebody's in danger of losing their life and you have to get them off a fishing boat or something?
I've yet experience of that on a December day about 3 years ago, when we were caught out in a force 8 gale to a fishing boat 90 mile west of Islay that had a man on board with a heart attack. And we flew out by right out of Arn, right out of Islay, and straight west out into the Atlantic, into this gale. And here's this trawler going up and down in 20, 30 foot high seas. And the helicopter had to come in and tap him and drop the winchman down. And in fairness, it was too dangerous for myself or my medic to go down to see the patient. So they sent the winchman, is a specially trained fella, they sent him down to see what was what. And he was lowered down, and then the streets were lowered down, and what they call a long line, which is about 150 feet or 200 feet of line went down with a winch. And while he was down on board with a winch attached to this line, the line got fankled round about the mast. And they were in a wee bit of pickle then. At least I didn't care what was going on. I think it was, I'd call it bliss for ignorance.
And who did you unfankle it?
Well, I didn't unfankle it, and that's what makes me feel the professionalism of the crew. I must admit, I'm never feared when I go out in a helicopter now after what happened. I was sitting up in the front, I couldn't see a damn thing, and what happened then was the pilot and the winchman at the back were negotiating with each other, and the winchman would say, right, for it 12 feet, back 4 feet, to the right 6 feet, for it 8 feet, and the pilot, as he'd out the window, unwound that fankled rope to the mast, facing into a gale with a boat bucking and tossing a blow him. And then we went sideways with the rope swinging in away from the mast, and eventually got the man off the ship and into hospital, and he was named the warrant. It was a rescue. The whole crew got a commendation for that, for an admiral, what we call an admiral's commendation. So it's quite an experience, that.
Are you worried that you might be cried out in something, a really big tragedy, something that's beyond your powers of being able to do things for
Well, I suppose you're aye worried. It doesn't matter what you go to, you're aye worried what you're going to, because your mind aye thinks the worst when you go there. But in fact, we were at Lockerbie, we were the second helicopter down at Lockerbie the night of the disaster, and we didn't know what we were going to at that time. I got the message that there was a jumbo jet had crashed, and they were fleeing out to Gannet, and there's a wee Glasgow medic there. And if he'd tell me, he says, "Doctor," he said, there's a jumbo jet's crashed, the message is in, don't care where it is, but it's somewhere near a place called Lockerbie. He said, "Where's Lockerbie, Doctor?" Is it up the west coast somewhere? No, that's a Glasgow lad, and he didn't ken where Lockerbie is now, and the whole world kens.
So what do you mind going over the Secht?
Well, I mind first of all the trip down, because we flew down in this valley over my home village in Newcomnock, and what flashed through my mind was when our Newcomnock was a Nutshinock disaster that affected our own village when I was a boy. We flew right down by the pit, or where it was dark, mind you, we couldn't see a thing, but through my mind just what happened that night at Newcomnock 40 years ago. And we landed down at Lockerbie, and the first thing we saw was a low of flames. And we had no idea, we thought the plane maybe crashed in the hills or the woods round about, we had no idea, and there was a terrible shock when the pilot reported back to us in the back that he could see flames in the tune, and it crashed in the tune. So we landed on there, and it was all chaos. There's nothing our observer had to get out the aircraft, walk across a ploughed field, flag down a police car, go into the control centre, and then we got the word we had to go and search for wreckage. And that annoyed us, because the medic and myself were all geared up with drip sets, and we reckoned if it crashed in the tune there must be hundreds of casualties, and why the hell were we even sent away to search for wreckage when we felt more useful?
But you have to do what you
were told? We had to do what tell. The pilot said, "Look, Doc," he said, "you're here with us. If we come across casualties, we're no use up the front of the aircraft. you've been tasked to stay with us, so you'll just have to stay. So we flew away, and we headed into the hills between Lockerbie and Langham, and found wreckage. We found a big, I think it was a bit of tail or something with Pan Am written on it. So we can actually, we identified the flight of that
How did
thing.
you actually find objects for that hit?
Well, you're fleeing quite low, and there was a bad night. There was a 30-knot wind blowing, and there's a bad night with low cloud, and we're fleeing just a sort of 100 feet above the hillside, and we had searchlights, spotlights doing it, and we were just playing them across the hillside, and you'd fin the A thing, in fin another thing, and we did in fact land on. We saw some sights. One of the poignant things was we had an American co-pilot in the crew that night, and he was really choked. He was really uptight.
He came to us few Americans.
He came to a few Americans, but the rumour was it was a troop carrier, a few American soldiers. That. Oh, so there were all sorts of rumours. They had no idea what it was. And we landed on beside some seats, and here was a hostess trolley still with food in it.
Is that right?
And there was parcels and the stuff out the hostess trolley, the perfumes and all the things lying about this hillside, 3 empty seats. And one of the things I mind was a parcel addressed to Massachusetts, some computer software with address still on it where it was supposed to be going.
Were you able to detach yourself from it because you were a professional doing a job?
We were detached at the time. In fact, we were fleeing a binnet. We didn't come across onto the casualty. We nearly came across it ourselves, because as we were fleeing about, there was a cushy-doo flew up, or at least I think it was a cushy, flew up into the rotors as we were fleeing over some woodland. And that
broke you down.
That's white knuckle time, because the pilot just told us all to be quiet, to shut up, and we had on for 10-20 seconds to get hear that the engines were revving okay, and then he said, look, we better go down and check as it was sucked into the jet intake. So we landed on at Lockerbie itself for the first time, and it was only then we discovered that we would have been no yes anyway, because for all the folk that had been killed, there were only been 5 folk taken to hospital, so we wouldn't have been needed medically. So we were able to detach ourselves a wee bit then and go back out for another 12 years searching till about 5 or 6 in the morning.
When did it strike you then, the enormity of the thing?
It struck me, we were there from 8 o'clock at night to 6 in the morning, and I got home, I got in the door about 7, and I just couldn't sleep. I was dead bait, I couldn't sleep, and I just waited to the news, and it was just at the first light, the first television bulletin showing that huge crater right across Sherwood Avenue that brought it home to me, and that's when I really felt choked, sick, and emotional. But before that, you're just divorced. If we've been doing in the ground, the heroes of that night were the fire brigade, because we met them when we went in for coffee, and they were drained and absolutely covered in smoke and soot and wabbit and shocked, and they were the lads that night that did the work in the town. And then the next day, it was the young servicemen that come up to do the body searches and things. They were the sort of heroes of the time. We were just there that night.
Have you ever been back since?
I visited the memorial in the graveyard outside Lockerbie, and I must admit it nearly makes me choke me now when I saw the list of names on it. It was an awful touching experience.
Yeah, you mentioned you're fae a wee mine in tune for tragedies, unfortunately, were quite commonplace, and the Knockshirach tragedy in 1951, if I mind correctly,
right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
For several men, just about 100 men were entombed, and about, was it half a dozen 7 men lost their lives?
No, it's more than that, Billy. I think there's, as far as I mind right, and I'm going back 40 years, there were 126 men trapped. And 13, I think, it lost their lives, or maybe more or less, but maybe even 129. There were 116, I think, broke out, and 13 died in the disaster. Aye. And I still mind it, even as a laddie. I was only 8 and a half at the time, and I had an uncle in the rescue teams. My father helped man the phones for about 6 days at the time of the disaster. Just everybody in the village did their bit. It was an inrush of moss, was it? It was an inrush. Because of the inclines in the pit and the steep gradients, they'd been working a heading, and it'd been up towards the surface, and they thought they had 100 feet to go, but they hadn't read their geology maps right enough, and they didn't ken, or they hadn't looked, and there was a basin of peat about 60 feet deep, and they just had been turning up through the coal and into the peat, and the peat was just, it was like a volcano in reverse. The peat was just soaked down into the workings, and there was a great big crater about 150 yards across, and thousands and thousands of tons of peat went down into the workings and killed the men in the head and straight off and trapped all the rest. The peat and the sludge and the slurry go between the pit bottom and the shift that were working.
Aye, I found it. I interviewed a number of the men who'd been trapped for the television programme in the mine I did, and it was an awful moving experience just talking to them. But yet the one thing that the tragedies like that and the hardship that the miners' row, folk that bid in the miners' rows had, it gave them a credible sense of community and togetherness. Did you experience that as a boy too?
Aye, well, Newcomnock was a village of about 3 or 4 different communities, Burnfit, the Craigbank, Connell Park, and the main village itself. So you'd actually 3 or 4 different communities at that time in the miners' rows. And it was only later, as these old houses were knocked down, that I think the community spirit was lost when they all went down to the big new post-war council houses, with a big ugly scheme that's still there on the hillsides, although the pits are away now.
Mm-hmm. What did you do as a wee boy? Was it very much an industrial thing, or did you play in the countryside too?
We played in the countryside and we played in the rows. I must admit, I had great fun. You had great fun. I still mind the miners' rows. I was brought up in them, but our house was better than some of the other things, because it was built about 1920, and it had an inside bathroom, an inside WC and a bathroom, and it had a bit in the scullery for a washing machine. But it still had the old black lead grate, and we used to make toast at the black lead. That's a wee memory I have, even at 5 or 6 year old, when I moved out of that house to another cottage. And even after we moved out, we used to play about the rows with the lads. My memories, in fact, is when you're playing your girl and cleat up and down the rows, you got to watch, because the women would come to the door and the jaw the call tea out the back door and jaw out the tatty peelings, and of course the back's close, or there's no back gardens to them. Just covered with all tea leaves and tatty peelings, and you had to watch yourselves. A wee bit like the Gardaí Lou in Edinburgh, in fact, at times.
So you were a Gurren Cleek expert?
Oh, I had a Gurren Cleek, and I was good enough at Gurren Cleek. It's either the pit blacksmiths that made every boy had a Gur or a Cleek, and there are 2 or 3 types of the Cleek itself, the Gur itself, with the rune metal, the rune wire, and then there's what they call the wind cutters, which were made, I think, for big gaskets. Maybe pipe gaskets of the pit, and they're discs, and they're supposed to go faster because they were thin and sharp, and they're called wind cutters.
Did you guddle the old troot in the nith?
No, in the nith, no. In the various burns, the Connell burn and other places, we guddled troot, and we gurned for beardies, which are a thing that
I've heard that expression for years.
Aye, well, the gurning for beardies is where you we went swimming, you were away duking, and we had our duking holes, and you get fed up, and we put the ragwort, put it out by the rits, and the ragwort's that big 3 foot high plant with a yellow flower, and it has rits maybe about 6 inches long white rits, and you'd pull most of the rits off, leave you in, tie a knot in it, a wee loop, and then you go after the beardie, which its proper name's a stone loach, and it's a wee slow moving fish, no like a trout, but more like a steam engine, but the trout dirty the wall, but the beardie would just lie still, and you used to sneak up ahint it and put the snare of girn, the old Scots word for a snare is a girn, and put the girn over its head, and then just yank it out. We never killed them, the secret was in the stalking them, and that was the fun, the stalking them, getting the beardie out and see if it's a big one or a wee one, and then letting it away again. We never harmed them.
But your interest in the water carried on into your adult life, because you're a keen angler, but you were also a water bailey for a while. What made you chase the poachers?
Well, I was a water bailey because I started off fishing the River Doon, and I quite a good stretch of water, and I only finished up in a season with about 2 or 3 fish, and that wasn't enough. When we came, the netsmen at the mouth of the waters got maybe 3 or 4,000 a year, and I started up an improvement association in the River Doon to try and improve the water. And of course, the big problem, as well as the netsmen at the mouth of the water netting fish, the poachers up and down the water. There were 3 or 4 gangs of poachers in every village in the River Doon at that time, and there was no contest. There was just anarchy. So one of the things we did was to spike all the pools with big grapnels and attach the concrete and aisle drums, and that caught a lot of the nets. But we had to hunt them as well, and so we set up with Fishery Board a voluntary water bailiff scheme, or baileys as we called them.
You would ken all the poachers that would, did you know?
We kent some of them. In fact, it was the same yins were after most of the time. You kent them and you kent who they worked, and you'd even blether with them now and again, and they say, you nearly got us last night, but see if you hadn't walked, see if you'd walked a hint, said, see if you'd walked a hint each other yon night, down at the mouth of the dune. He said, you'd have got us. We'd have just took your ye man out for a walk, but you walked side by side and we could see their flowers, so we kent your baileys, so we scattered.
What are some of your best catches that you've had?
I think the funniest catch, you're talking about salmon coating a day or poachers coating.
I was thinking of poachers,
right,
grupping poachers.
I think the funniest story was, we'll call this in Puggy and his brother Rab. And Puggy he wasn't a netting poacher, he's what they called a howker. They used to use big treble shucks and nae worms in the shucks, and big lead wecht, and they'd throw the lead wecht and the shucks into a pool and rake it across the bottom of the pool, and they'd snag the salmon by the side or the belly. I mean, they called it pooing it out by the jacket, was the expression that was used, or pooing it out sideways. And this, he used to boast about it. I mean, he would lie half a dozen salmon out in his back garden, or even his front garden, till the bailies see them when it by, but they could do nothing about it, they couldn't prove it. I mean, it's all in this question of proof, and he can't unless he was actually on the water and caught at it.
In flagrante.
Get away, in flagrante delicta, And there's a day we get the grapevine tells us that Puggy and Rab were in the water, so 5 of us went up and 3 went for the bottom and 2 all went in for the top end. There's a bit that called the rough water up the Thorn Tree Pool near Patna, and we nabbed them. Well, nae shucks, nae permits, so we got them for fishing without permission, and we got them fishing with illegal tackle. And Puggy gave us his rod, and his brother didn't. Rab held on to his rod. But Puggy was surprised me, Puggy gave it up without a fecht. And he'd bail out to Waterphone the police. And Rab says to Puggy, oh Puggy, come here, can a wee word with you? So I thought there was something happening. So I just followed him up the bank, and they sat down the edge of the bank, about 8 feet above the water, and the water's gay gurly, it was a spate that was on it, it was 4 feet deep here. Rab gives a loup, and loups off an 8 foot high bank into 4 feet of water, and starts to sprockle across the far, and he's halfway across and he realised Puggy hadn't followed him. So he turns round and shouts, "Oh, Puggy, are you coming?" Puggy says, "No, I ran for the bloody police a fortnight ago and I'm not running again. On you go." So he sprockled across to the far side and got up the bank, looked like a drookit dog, and he just stood there. And I started some psychological warfare on him, and I said, "Look, son," I said, "you've been done for poaching, you've been done for fishing without a permit. I'm going to do you for obstructing a bailey in the course of his duty if you don't come back across that water." And he stood there. And then to my surprise, this was October, mind you, he got back into the water and he started to wade back across, up to his chest again. And he's halfway across, and I'm busy, "Come on, son," and his brother saying, "Now, where you go?" And I'm saying, "Come on, son, you'll get fined £100. And if you come back across, we'll drop the chairs." And Puggy said, "Where you go? You'll only get fined a score." He's talking a lot of rubbish. And to finish up, he took his brother's advice, and he was only fined, in fact, £20 more than his brother. So it's based on a brother that's well versed in the ways of the court.
In your book of stories, you cry that the Sundance
Butch and Sundance. It was just struck, even when he looped off the bank, and it just looked exactly like yon bit in Butch Cassidy and Sundance Clyde, where the sheriff's men were chasing them and they looped into the water. It was an awful funny incident. We nearly wet ourselves laughing ourselves at that.
The book is a collection of poems and short stories by yourself and a Mr. Reid, who's an ex-headmaster for Ayrshire, and it's all in Scots, and it was scrivet and published for a good cause. Tell us about that.
John Reid and myself published this book for the Ayrshire Hospice, and we've sold 2,500 copies so far at the £5 each. So we've made at the moment, taking off the publishing cost, about £5,500 for the hospice. But that's it. The Ayrshire Hospice needs the money, and it was a great way. I mean, it's been a 3-way thing. After a great book published, the hospice has made a lot of money, and a lot of folk have enjoyed it thoroughly, and that's it. And the fourth aim I shouldn't say the unwritten aim, because it is written in it in the foreword by Tom Fleming, and my own foreword is the publicising of the use of the Scots tongue,
which is
to keep it going.
Dear to your heart.
It was dear to my heart, yeah.
You're a Burns man too, living in the heart of the Burns country. Do you ever feel that the Burns tradition, it kind of ossifies some aspects of Scottish culture? There's times I've been at Burns gatherings where I feel as if it's the formal thing that's to now rather than the feel of the poetry. Living there, what do you think yourself?
I think it depends where you go. Some Burns clubs must be a wee bit ossified, but if you go up into the country, you go up to lakes in Cumnock. Some Burns club are they're awful polite now, and I mean, I'm past president of Alloway Burns Club, and it's a great wee Burns Club, and it's a mixed Burns Club, and I take my hat after them, because a lot of Burns Clubs are still all male drinking clubs, some of them, and that's an impression sometimes you get. But when you go up to somewhere like New Cumnock Burns Club, which is an all-male club, you'll find it's a marvellous club. They've a great night I had last January up there doing a toast in New Cumnock. And a lot of the Burns clubs, especially in the country areas, they've got a depth of knowledge of Burns that put mine to shame. They're superb.
Being a Burns man, when you enjoy going out in the countryside in Ayrshire, do you come across things that remind you of Burns in his poetry?
Well, again, going back to my own roots up by, the Burns wrote Flow Gently Sweet Afton about the River Afton New Cumnock, and I mind as a boy going up to the Leigh Ferm and seeing his initials scraped on a glass pane in the porch window. So I mean, that's a wee thing that I think when you're a lad, there's a wee bit of local history to ken that Burns had written that marvellous song about your own village and the Burn, and he'd stayed there. He used to stay there when he was going between Ellisland and Mauchline. It was like in a halfway house. And even in the Doon, we were talking about Doon a wee minute ago, where I fish at Doon Home, there's a line of big lime trees which were planted by William Burns, Burns's father, who's a gardener and overseer at Doon Home House for Provost Ferguson at the time when he built the cottage and when Burns was born. And they're still there, and that's a great... I look at these trees every time I'm out in the water, and some of the other big specimen trees that are in the estate also planted by him, and it's a great feeling to ken there's a living link with Burns.
I could talk to you all day, but I'm afraid that time's run out on us. But I'm sure Rabbie would rack you his horn to you, and he was ways the day. Thanks for joining me in the programme, Jimmy, and to everybody at home, may all your pains be doucines that you can throw, and may joy be with ye, yin and do.